In the world of Turinlay rests an enormous island called Pricene. The nation of Pricene is governed by a king and council, though the real power rests in the hands of 10 cursed immortals, powerful supernatural figures who serve only their self-interests. The land is plagued with black-blooded monsters, corrupt political leaders, and bloodthirsty bandits. And the one man who is willing to stand up to them all just so happens to be an unholy abomination, a summoner of the undead, the necromancer of Pricene. Coming September 1st, 2025 to a podcatcher near you. For more information, please visit creativetypo.com.
This episode may contain content that is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised, especially for those under the age of 13. Welcome to Into the Night. I'm Nari, your guide on today's excursion down a twisted path. Be careful not to get lost. Be it dark or light, it's easy to lose your way. Are you ready? Then let's begin. The Abandons, Part 3.
Mr. Greby didn't lie when he said it would be hard work. I hurt in places I didn't even know existed before. Not a one of us made it through the day without some bruises, cuts, and the occasional broken bone. When the men took off for the gold mines that had opened in Colorado, they left behind a ranch filled with fearsome horses to break and rowdy cows to wrangle. No job was considered too big or too small for us to tackle, and there were moments when the thought did cross our minds to quit. It's only natural, when you've had the tar kicked out of you by a horse, to give some consideration to never doing it again. We didn't dare say it out loud, though. We knew we couldn't quit. There was no going back to High Lake. The horrors that awaited us there were too gruesome. We couldn't risk leaving our fate up to whatever or whoever showed up at the orphanage to adopt us either. As rough as the Brighton Ranch was, it was far better than the alternatives. The wrath of the Stoltzmans alone was enough to commit us to the Brighton. Who knew what they'd do to us in retaliation? The undetermined future we faced in that situation kept us from uttering a single complaint. Worse than what could have happened to us boys, however, was what the girls risked. I'd have endured breaking every bone in my body if it meant saving Rizzy. Our boss was an observant man. He didn't have to say anything. I could tell that Mr. Greby respected the effort we made, even if we had a lot to learn. We knew next to nothing about ranching when we arrived. Sure, I'd helped Pa tend our horses and the few cows and chickens we had, but they were all tame enough to be pets. I didn't know how mean a cow or a horse could be before I set foot on the Brighton. Was I scared? Damn right I was scared. Those wild-eyed bovines with foaming slobber coming out of their mouths would scare any sane person. I guess that's why cowboys had such a rough reputation, because they had to be half crazy to jump into a riled herd of cattle. But they did that and put themselves into 100 other hair-raising predicaments. The cows were bad, but the horses were a whole other mess of orneriness. It was bad enough to be bucked off one of the critters, but the dang things found pleasure in biting, stomping, and kicking us, too. Stint lost a tooth or two, and he was past the age when they grow back. Weren't no baby teeth amongst us, and we took it hard when any of us suffered a permanent mark. When we'd worked for a month or so, Huck Pyle, the grizzled old man of the ranch, and Mr. Greby told us they needed us to ride out to the far edge of the ranch to search for strays. We all said yes, sir, but we were shaking in our boots. Not a one of us had ever slept outside before without an adult present. We'd either grown up in the orphanage or we had a home before we went there with someone to watch over us. Knowing we'd be out on our own with nothing but the rattlesnakes and coyotes around us, well, it caused our hearts to drum out a cadence while still wanting to stop beating all at the same time. Off we went, though. The first day was spent mainly just riding to the far reaches of the Brighton. It was a big spread, and the terrain wasn't made for a quick ride. By the time sunset loomed on the horizon, we were far enough, we figured. Dusty, hungry, and on edge, we built a small campfire and did our best to stick close to one another. Exhausted, I could barely keep my eyes open, but it seemed that every strange sound made my lids pop open. Eventually, though, I fell into a fitful sleep and managed a few hours of rest. The next morning, we found a group of cows. A few had calves with them, and they let us know our presence by their young'uns wasn't appreciated. Still, we worked as a team and kept them in a tight group as we made our way through the hills and valleys in search of more lost herd. Before long, we'd gathered a good 100 or so and were eager to return back to the ranch house with our herd. The rocky slopes were hard to traverse, and it was all we could do to urge our horses down some of the ravines. I rode on the east side of the herd when a yell came from behind me. I looked back to see a riderless horse staring down the rocky hillside. I swung my horse around and headed back, and Ike came riding up behind me. It was then we heard the rattling and watched in horror as Lester Peak was repeatedly struck by the biggest snake any of us had ever seen. It hit his throat 3 times before we could dismount, and even though I aimed and fired as quickly as I could to kill the serpent, for Lester, it was too late, however. A few of us sat with him until the end, while the rest of the boys kept watch over the herd. Lester was one of the brothel children, who had no one to mourn him but us. Tom and I loaded his body onto his horse and led it back to the bunkhouse in solemn silence. Even the herd plodded sedately along, as if it even knew tragedy had struck someone too young to deserve death. Grattan Grubby waited for us as we approached. At first, he figured we were tuckered out and moving slowly. Then his keen eyes spotted the body slumped sideways over Lester's horse, and he called out to some of the older hands to ride out and take over the herd. His face bore the loss as much as ours did. He reached us and took in the ugly bite marks across the boy. A rattler. He said no more. The weight of his voice said all that needed to be said.
There was nothing we could do, Mr. Grubby,
Tom offered. Boys, there's nothing anyone could do for him. You did the right thing by bringing him home. That was the first time the Brighton had been called home for us, and the emotional impact of those words made it hard to breathe. Go on to the bunkhouse. I'll have the men prepare him for burial. I'll make sure Reverend Hayes knows, and he'll do the ceremony tomorrow. This boy deserves a proper burial, and I aim to make sure he gets it. I don't think I wanted to hug anyone so much, not since Ma and Pa died, as I did in that moment. Thank you, sir, was all I could choke out. We boys rode toward the bunkhouse, wiping our faces with our sleeves.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Into the Night Anthology podcast. Written by Caroline Giamanco, narrated by Nari. Theme music by Nico Rodriguez. All other original music, sound design, and editing by Omen Hawk Studios. You can find our links in the show notes. Into the Night is on your favorite podcatcher, so make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review to help other excursionists to join us. I'll see you next time. And remember, whether in the shadows or in the daylight, all twisted paths lead you into the night. Into the Night Anthology is a Creative Typo Entertainment production.